Good morning, everybody. I am mic'd up. I suddenly have an extremely loud voice. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Sam Kimmins, Director of Energy at Climate Group. It's very exciting to welcome you all to the Green Energy Forum at our first and hopefully one of many, first of many, Asia Action Summit. So welcome everybody. For you who don't already know Climate Group, we're an international not-for-profit with offices in London, Delhi, Beijing, New York and Amsterdam. And our mission is to drive climate action fast. Now, we do this by forming powerful networks of committed businesses and governments to move whole systems such as energy, transport and the built environment and industry to a cleaner future. So for the past 6 years, I've been heading one of those coalitions, the RE100 campaign. RE100 brings together over 400 companies committed to 100% renewable electricity, some of whom are here today. Together, these companies, if we were a country, RE100 would be the 11th largest country in the world by electricity consumption. We're larger than the UK and around 2/3 to 3/4 the size of South Korea. Oh, my mic's on again. Is everybody hearing that? Yes. Asia is the fastest growing region for RE100 membership, with 158 companies headquartered in the region, 3 of whom are right here in Singapore. And we're finding that the corporate demand for renewable electricity has never been stronger in Asia. Asia really is waking up to the energy transition and is really moving fast. Increasingly, RE100 members are asking for renewable electricity not just for their own operations, but they're asking their suppliers to use 100% renewable electricity as well. And with the EU introducing the carbon border adjustment mechanism, for Asia, the energy transition is not just a climate issue, it's an export economy issue. Indeed, some of our members have described membership of RE100 as being their passport to international trade. For a region responsible for over 80% of remaining coal use around the world, the transition to renewables represents a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity. The opportunity to leapfrog so-called bridging fuels like gas and avoid the pitfalls of billions of dollars of wasted in obsolete energy infrastructure and stranded assets by moving directly to renewables. And according to the International Energy Agency, in a fair market, renewable electricity is the cheapest form of power in history. The key word here is fair. And most markets in Asia are still geared towards preference for coal and large centralized infrastructure. We're not there yet. In fact, the top 5 most challenging markets for RE100 to source RE100 members to source renewables are here in Asia. So seizing the investment opportunity represented by RE100 and its like is now more about political will than it is a technical challenge. The technology is here. It's now about forming the cross-industry, intergovernment collaborations. It's about removing policy barriers. And it's about scaling up markets both within borders and through regional interconnections, both politically, regulatory, and physical interconnections. We live in exciting times, and there is a huge amount of work to do. The clean energy transition is not just about renewable electricity, it's about renewable heat, green hydrogen, the electrification of industry, huge amounts of technological innovation, and the expansion of energy storage. They're all near horizon challenges, some of which you'll be hearing about this morning. I hope today's event will inform and encourage you, forge new connections, and help you to push forward your part in the energy transition. Thank you. So now I'm going to take my introductory hat off and put on my MC hat You've heard enough from me. I'd like to welcome you to our Pure Business Sense session, where we'll be hearing from leading corporations showcasing examples of their contribution to the energy transition in Asia. And they'll be showing us what this looks like in terms of the challenges involved and how this is affecting their bottom line. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first of our 4 speakers, Shanshan Kyo, Director of the Board and Chief Brand Officer of Delta Electronics. I have the slides in different order to my presentation. Let's go in the order of the slides, shall we? Sophia Cheng, the Chief Investment Officer, Cathay Financial Holdings. Welcome.
Should I start?
You can stand wherever you like.
Okay. Good morning. I'm a big fan of IE100, and we're very happy that Cathay is the first Taiwan financial institution become a member for us of IE100 last year. I have only 7 minutes. Cathay Financial Holdings is the largest financial group in Taiwan. We have largest insurance company, second largest private bank, biggest asset manager, and we have a small venture capital and broker. Because we service 2/3 of Taiwan population, it's very important. Every day we think about on clients' behalf, who do I support, who do I lend to, and who do I invest? And therefore, we have been very well recognized by our engagement to our stakeholders. Since 2016, we joined Asia Investor Group on climate change. Myself is the chairperson for AIGCC. In 2018, we support TCFD, and we thought of international participation as the best way to learn the global trend and how to make it work. So you can see we have very clear roadmap for future, including last year, 2022, we joined IE100. And so Cathay has a net zero target by 2050. Besides our operation, investment is very important. And to make investment work, in the middle you can see we must do engagement. And we have to make sure our investee company know all the push forwards we come with a good intention, because we want them to transform, to do transition rather than wanting them to disappear. So just focus on IE100 itself, how we have done. The whole project is well organized is led by our CEOs from holding company and subsidiaries, myself, Chief Risk Officer, and also from operation team and sustainability team. You can see it's actually a quite big project from policy engagement, buying the renewable energy certificate, making sure we have green power, because we have more than 200 office buildings in Taiwan. And today in the center, you can see we consume 114 gigawatts of electricity last year. We already have 8% of our energy come from renewable. It's actually quite low, but the whole country last year was less than 5%. So it's all accelerating. We are also one of the biggest renewable energy investor, both on solar power plant and offshore wind power. So being more active in supporting the renewable energy growth, we can work on engaging the government to do energy transition. So by 2030, we will want to have 100% of our Taiwan office operation all with renewable energy, while 2050, we need to do all roughly 1,000 footprint in Asia, all commit to renewable IE100. The challenge of making renewable energy is that in Taiwan, it's very manufacturing-based country. So the existing renewable energy procurement is designed for manufacturing company, who tend to have the factory run 24 hours. The current electricity is, they review every 15 minutes how much energy you use, and the specific renewable energy side, how much they provide, so they can look every 15 minutes. Do you really match the renewable energy usage? Which is so hard for office. For example, we use a lot of electricity in daytime, but we hardly use that in evening. So through a lot of engagement, we try to solve the problem. Today, most of our peers can also enjoy that. There's also very scarce renewable certificates that we can buy, and some manufacturing companies are very active. They can buy at any price. So you can see the T-Reg already priced about 4 times higher than a couple years ago. And there's also lack of data from the power company to offer on, say, per 10 minutes cases. So we cannot do very good data analytics, helping the whole ecosystem to build renewable, energy management system is also important. So with all the challenges you see on the top, today we have successfully engaged with the government. Now we can do the total aggregate power consumption on a monthly basis and consolidated basis. At the meantime, we continue to add more investment on solar power plant, offshore wind power, and also buy the renewable energy certificate. But I tend to think reducing carbon emission is more important than buying the offsets. And then lastly, we also have built energy management system. Okay, so that's for ourselves. The other thing is Taiwan, we have more than 90% of corporates who are SMEs. Maybe we can afford to buy it, but they just can't. They need a lot of help, including education. In 2021, there's only 2.1% of Taiwan's energy come from renewable, but the government has aggressive target that by 2050, it has to be 60%. So financial institution on sustainable finance, we can help to push that. And we have formed a Cathay Power Inc., which is a renewable energy platform that the SME corporate, they can participate in the procurement. They are not alone. Where to the right-hand side, as we are facing this commitment and stress, we found how to convert that from risk into opportunity. We have decided we have about 260 office buildings in Taiwan. We want to be the green landlord. And end up it was a surprise because many companies, they come to us, I want to be your tenant because their headquarters also require IE100 globally. So besides IE100, we are also very active, review our green investment. We have done the carbon footprinting of our portfolio, both equity and fixed income. We are very, very active on shareholder activism, engaging our investee company. Only if they change, we can really have successful transition. We have also approved by SBT on our net zero transition pathway. So I have put a roadmap here. You can see every blue words are additional. Every year we will think about what else additional we can do. So from TCFD, CDP, non-disclosure campaign, climate action 100+, valuing water initiative, and IE100 last year. We hope we can continue to do more. And I'd like to encourage all to do that together. In terms of finally on suggestion and observation, energy storage is very critical. We are creating our electricity. We don't save them, we waste it. So in Taiwan market, we are now building energy storage system already. Also, in many countries, they do have SME. How to include them together to have the access, can also access to renewable energy is also very important. Then we don't leave anyone behind. And lastly, it's very important to consider the just transition because a lot of people, when they change the way we do business, many people need education, need a connection to the next opportunity. Then we can really have prosperity without a lot of people feel they are disadvantaged. So with the 7 minutes, I hope I have done a little bit summary for that.
You're pretty much on there. Thank you very much, Sophia. Sophia, I have one question for you before you go. So, RE100, you mentioned in one of your slides the fossil fuel phase out. And one of the things that RE100 has been encouraging financial institutions to look at is how they're phasing out coal-fired power and thermal coal mining in their investments. And could you share with us how Cathay Financial Holdings is looking at this issue?
I often found people say doing sustainability, doing green transition will make loss. It wouldn't. Don't take ESG and green transition as an excuse not to do well. And we have, I think phasing out coal is not that difficult because besides the emission, there's also pollution problem there. For Taiwan, the biggest challenge is we import energy. 97% of Taiwan's energy depends on import. So we are very active in exit coal. For the bank, 2019 onward, no more new coal-fired loan. And so by first quarter 2027, zero. Insurance company is, you can be investor engaging the stakeholders. So we don't make any new investment for company. If they are correlated, they must have aggressive transition plan. That's basic. So making the impact is more important. I don't want them to disappear. I want all these companies continue to support and provide energy, but at a renewable way. This is a long journey, and every company has different learning curve. We need to respect their bottleneck, but at the meantime, throw them a lot of solution in the world so they can understand, oh, it's workable.
That's great. So phase-out plans with some quite firm deadlines there.
Yes, it is. Very stressful. And, and Climate Action 100 Plus, globally, it's 700 investors with total AUM about $70 trillion US. We together engage 166 corporates. They represent 80% of global industrial emission. And out of 166, 32 are in Asia, 3 are in Taiwan. They all commit to net zero and carbon neutrality. We also add additional many companies together. Their commitment is only the beginning of our project. Because once they commit to that, you need to mentor running with them on the marathon.
Great, thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sophia Cheng, Chief Investment Officer, Cathay Financial Holdings. Our second speaker, and I've got it right this time, is Angela Triana, Head of APAC Revenue and Origination in Ørsted. We'll also be covering Taiwan.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Angela Trainer. I'm from Ørsted. Very happy to be here and part of such a wonderful panel discussing today. I'm going to share with you some case study from an offshore wind project that we have in Taiwan. So who is Ørsted? Ørsted is a renewable energy company. We are the global leader in offshore wind, and we have a carbon neutral ambition to be a carbon neutral business by 2025, but also to have a carbon neutral business footprint by 2040. That involves the green steel supply chain, which is also a very important topic in the room next door to us today. This year, in 2023, we entered into construction phase for a new project in Taiwan. It's a 920 megawatt offshore wind project, and it's backed by a corporate PPA with TSMC. TSMC, you may know, is the world's leading semiconductor company. They joined the ORI 100 in 2020 and also have net zero ambitions for their own business for 2050. So I'll take you through a little bit of the timeline of how we reached this milestone this year. In 2018, we were awarded this project at the Offshore Renewable Energy Feed-in Tariff auction. In 2020, we signed a corporate PPA for the full volume with TSMC. This year, we took FID, Final Investment Decision, or in other words, financial close. And in 2025, we will deliver first power to TSMC and also expected to reach COD by the end of the year. When we started out on this journey in 2019, TSMC approached us just after we were awarded at the auction. It was a very interesting proposal to us, and it took us quite by surprise that they were interested in the offtake from the entire project. At that stage, it wasn't something that we had considered in great detail in Taiwan. We had done corporate PPAs in Europe and the US, but this was a new concept to us. And considering 920 megawatts with one off-taker, there was a lot we had to work through to make this a viable case. So first step, we had to think about, okay, can we exit our contract with Taipower? This is a AA rated government-backed subsidy contract. Is a corporate PPA going to be viable? We had to think through TSMC as an entity, and could we have just that one off-taker for this entire gigawatt scale project? Then the challenges started to progress from there. TSMC really wanted the power by 2025, but actually our construction schedule was planned for 2026. So we had to think through how we could accelerate to meet their requirements. Furthermore, Taiwan is a regulated power market, and so doing a corporate PPA there has to take on some additional considerations than we had experienced elsewhere globally. Also, offshore wind, a large infrastructure project, we had to think through ports availability, vessels availability, and also turbine selection. Before we could get to solutions, there were a few barriers that we needed to overcome. First of all, the corporate PPA framework. It had been tested out for solar at this stage. Google had signed one PPA for 10 megawatts, but there are things that offshore wind needs that a solar project can't. For example, the wheeling agreement was 1 year renewing tenor, whereas we needed to show it could last for 20. The O&M periods needed for maintenance offshore are much longer than something onshore, so we need to adjust the framework to allow for that. Also, in considering when we look at the counterparty risk, corporate PPAs, yes, we were comfortable with. Yes, TSMC is an extremely strong entity, but the scale of the corporate PPA, the 20-year tenor, that did mean we had to look at new investment committee and risk mandates in order to make this viable. We were lucky that TSMC is such a strong entity that we were able to find solutions for this as well. From a technical point of view as well, we needed to look at a one-season installation. So for that, it meant installing over 65 turbines in one season, which can be quite challenging considering offshore weather windows are unpredictable. We need to consider great logistics for making that all happen in a coordinated manner. So this year, the outcome, final investment decision was possible in 2023. It was in a time of global challenges for offshore wind. We had strong fundamentals with this project, considering it was large scale, we had full flexibility on local content requirements, and also backed by the long-term corporate PPA revenues. We were able to find solutions with the government in terms of port access, in terms of grid availability, and we also had a lengthy review on the regulations, on our contracting, on our procurement tracks as well. So in terms of the lessons learned and what we wanted to share with you today, from the outset of this, we really took a partnership mindset with TSMC, and that was key to our success. Transparency and trust were really important. This is a 20-year agreement. We rely on TSMC as much as they rely on us to deliver. And so in that sense, we were really keen to make sure that we worked very collaboratively from the start. What we learned is that accelerating the construction process, it takes a lot of experience and market understanding to be able to take that on. In this case, we did see that having that experience really helped us to support TSMC on their goals. I think in that case, look for experienced developers where you can find them. It doesn't always have to be Ørsted. There are very good developers out there with domestic, with international, or with partner experience that can help you on your journey. Similar to what Sophia mentioned, the buyers' voices in Taiwan have been really important in developing the regulations, and that is something that we found as well as we tried to bring forward some of the challenges. And lastly, for us, a strong partner really helped us consider new ways of thinking, take a higher risk tolerance, and support problem solving. And we really see that that partnership mindset can help us move forward as we see progress in some of the challenging markets in APAC, and working together with a partnership mindset can help us all work to create a world that runs on green energy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move around here so I'm not hiding behind the thing. I do have a question for you that's not on the agreed question list. 920 megawatt capacity. Could you give the audience an idea of how big that is, just in terms of compared to Singapore or something?
Oh, that will test my technical understanding of the project. The footprint, yeah, it's quite a vast. It's 35 to 40 kilometers offshore. So this is what we would call a far-shore project. It's 65 turbines, and each turbine is 14 megawatts each. So these are very, very large-scale turbines. If we're talking about the production in terms of gigawatt hours, it's over 4 terawatt hours. So quite a significant proportion of energy.
So that's a small country.
Yes.
That's absolutely enormous in technical speak. So what do you think we'd like to see more of this. This is a record-breaking project. We'd like to see that record broken quite soon, as I imagine Ørsted will also like. What are the most important things to unlock more renewables, more projects like this for buyers in the Asia-Pacific region?
So we really do believe that offshore wind is key to success in the region. We've had great success for onshore and solar, but the next phase to unlock renewables at scale, we need further offshore wind development. There are a key recipe that we see in Ørsted to make it happen. Large-scale projects help both with economies of scale, but also on a global competitive landscape. We compete with vessels for European projects, for example, and so we need to be showing large-scale projects here to incentivize that supply chain to continue here. Furthermore, having sustainable local content policies. We're seeing a lot of incentive for local industry to build manufacturing locally, and while that can be a great policy, there are other things that maybe passes on higher cost to buyers, or we could incentivize green steel, for example, as part of that as a non-price factor initiative. So yeah, we see that there are some of the key components. Also, combining corporate PPAs with subsidies. We're seeing that the shift is happening quite quickly to corporate PPAs, and sometimes the balance or the burden of risk isn't quite fair on buyers, and so having sustainable models that can see those two things coexist could really help unlock more renewables.
So really unlocking that scale that will bring down the price. And as one of the things that RE100 members are noting is that renewable electricity in Asia is more expensive than in other parts of the world. My understanding is that is largely a factor of scale. Once you get to certain levels, the price goes significantly down. So that route to unlocking scale is going to be very, very important, and we look forward to seeing gigawatt scale wind farms plans in the very near future.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
So to introduce our third speaker, Shanshan Zhou, who gets her second introduction of the day, the Director of the Board and Chief Brand Officer from Delta Electronics, again from Taiwan.
Yes.
Real leadership from Taiwan, note. So other countries in the region, we'd like to see, take note of this, and next year, we'd like to see some competition.
Thank you. Apparently a very Taiwan-heavy session, and I believe it's because RE100 has done a great job in Taiwan, so there are many fans, and I'm actually a promoter for RE100. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for inviting Delta to share our experience. First, I would like to introduce Delta Electronics a little bit so you know what company it is. We started in 1971. Our founder is Mr. Bruce Chen. In the 70s, the world is facing an oil crisis, quite similar to what we're facing today, the energy crisis. So our founder has the vision, and he knows that energy efficiency is really important for the environment. So he set the mission as to provide innovative, clean, and energy-efficient solutions for a better tomorrow. Nowadays, everybody knows that climate change and energy issue is a big challenge for all of us. But we're very lucky that Delta started on the first day when the company is founded. But actually what Delta does is related to our everyday life. If you have a cell phone, 1/3 of a chance that there is a passive component in your cell phone. If you own an adapter, own a laptop computer, 50% of chance that the adapter is manufactured by Delta. And we're the largest telecom power supplier in the world, and we also supply a power system and thermal system to large data centers, including Amazon and Microsoft and big data center runners. So in the 1980s, the power efficiency, energy efficiency was only around 50%. You can imagine how much power was lost during the transmission. But now, our energy efficiency has increased to be over 96, 97%. So just imagine the volume that the electricity can be saved. I did some calculation. From year 2010 to 2021, by using Delta's high efficiency products, we help our customer to save 36 billion kilowatt hour of electricity. And just to answer Sam's question earlier, if we place that into account for the place of Singapore, that is enough to power Singapore for 8 months. That's the power saved. So in addition to high efficiency products, Delta is also a forerunner to promote green buildings. It started in 2006 when our founder read a book, Natural Capitalism, and he found out that the building has the most potential in saving energies. So we started to build all our buildings green. Now we have 32 green buildings around the world, including our headquarters around the world, India, Taiwan, China, Southeast Asia, of course. And with that experience, we brought that experience to share in COP meetings in 2015. 2015 at COP21 in Paris. And that was a milestone for Delta because we got a huge response from the audience. Everyone wants their buildings to be green. And we noticed that we can take a major role in terms of supplying technology. And we started to aggressively merger and acquisite new companies around the world. And now building automation has become a major business for Delta. This is a perfect example to show that what started out as a goodwill to the environment can later on become a good business. And 2015 is also the year we signed on We Mean Business as well. And in addition to buildings, transportation is the second largest emitter. And Delta started early in 2008. And now we're the powertrain supplier, the heart of an EV, except for the storage part. We supply to 70% of the top 20 car makers. And when the number of EV are increasing, there will be a great pressure on the power grid. So Delta developed an EV charging system. We now have shipped 2 million units around the world. And we have energy storage system, power conditional system, so that the energy management platform can provide a more resilient power system, power grid to a smart society, smart city. And we share our technology and experiences to all people on the COP events. We have hosted 16 side events. And I would like to highlight COP21. In Paris, we share green buildings, and we share the distributed energy system and how to make an island with a small island with a more resilient power structures. And as for other global initiatives, Delta has joined our EV100 in year 2018. And we joined RE100 in 2021 and committed to using 100% RE renewable energy. And we even go beyond that. We commit to reach carbon neutrality by year 2030 as well. And just to set a higher target, we committed and joined SBTI, a Science-Based Target Initiative. And we try to use a scientific method just to set a more aggressive goal to reach net zero by year 2050. And we are the first Asian high-tech company to pass the review of SBTI last year. As for RE100, this is where we are now, and we are heading forward. When we committed in year 2021, with all the efforts, we were able to achieve RE 56%. And by year 2022, last year, we're able to achieve 63%. To be more strategically, we ask all eight regions to cover 35 countries of all Delta operations to set their own incremental goals. We do energy saving, we self-generate, and we procure credible green energies. And we're very confident with more advanced innovations that will be able to reach our goal to have 100% renewable energy by year 2030. And with our renewable vision, we see that it's not only a barrier, but it's also a business opportunities as well. First, we help our customer to procure credible renewable electricity to meet their needs. And by doing that, we're able to strengthen the relationship with our customers. Second, by applying Delta solutions, as Sophia just mentioned, that they need energy storage system, and that's what Delta does. Energy storage, power conditioning system behind the meter can help corporations to meet their RE goals. And the third, we actually expand our business scope to provide EAC, energy attribute certificate service to our customers. We build solar plants in Japan so that we're with Delta solutions, so that we'll be able to provide EAC to our customers. Last but never the least, software. We create a software to optimize RE. Also, in the previous presentation, we know that in Taiwan, the Taiwanese government has regulated that Taiwan's PPA has to be 24/7 carbon-free energy. It means that every 15 minutes, your electricity consumption has to meet renewable energy. That's a pretty challenging task for all of us because we all know buying renewable is really challenging. So we developed a preparatory data model to calculate, to record, and to forecast so that you know the best timing to procure renewable energy and to reach the best RE ratio. So this software will be very helpful for companies that will have to meet their RE targets. All in all these efforts are trying to make Delta and more people to be able to achieve the RE goals. So lastly, I would just like to quote our founder again, and he says, "The value of an enterprise existence is always to contribute its expertise and capability to society." And that's exactly what Delta is working with RE100. We'd like to contribute our expertise and capabilities to you all. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shan. A question I have, a lot of companies complain that being a first mover, particularly in sustainability, is expensive and it costs a lot of money. Yet Delta continues to be a pioneer in this area. What advice would you give to companies that think this is a cost?
Yes, well, that's a very commonly asked question, and maybe I can answer that by giving one example. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that Delta entered the EV market in 2008. That's really early stage, and I have to honestly report that it was not until this year we just break even. It's a long time. We spend a lot of time, a lot of resource in research and development, but we see that's the right trend, and it's right not just for business, and it's right for all people. So we're very happy also to report that because our founder said if you're doing the right thing, eventually it will pay off. You will make money. And we're very happy to report that we had a double-digit growth in revenue in year 2021 compared to 2022 compared to 2021. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So it takes patience.
Yeah, so patience, but also, I'm hearing from that example, it's putting sustainability at the core of your business.
Yes.
It's actually what product are you making and what are you doing with your business as opposed to just tinkering around the edges. So really putting it at the heart has paid off in the long term.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Delta Electronics. I'd like to introduce our final speaker for this session. Last but certainly not least, Mathsi Kuti, the Asia-Pacific leader for Amazon Climate Pledge, who will be talking about a multi-corporation effort to tackle climate change at scale. Welcome to the stage.
I'm going to use the podium. Oops.
It's all right.
Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, the inspiring speakers before me did a great job. And as they were presenting, I was thinking, most of the things that I wanted to cover is already spoken about here. So it just makes my job easier. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm here today to present about an industry view, while each speaker brought out their company experiences, their challenges, and what they're trying to work on in the renewable energy transition. How can we as an industry come together, foster collaboration, and drive change that is needed, right? So for those who don't know, the Climate Pledge, doesn't seem to. Give me just a moment. Yeah. So for those who don't know, the Climate Pledge is a commitment to get to net zero carbon by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, right? And this was co-founded by Amazon alongside the not-for-profit Global Optimism way back in 2019. And as you've seen, since then, the community has grown to over 400 signatories across multiple geographies and multiple sectors. And what is interesting is that companies are already taking a lot of action. There is possibility in coming together to drive collaboration and drive the energy transition. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about here today. So if you look at Asia in particular, we face a unique set of challenges, right? The traditional dependencies that you have on fossil fuels, the international fundings that there exist, right? The dependence on international funding. Even the growing energy demand. We are such an emerging market, developing market, that governments and leaders are trying to cater to this energy demand while also making sure that they have the pressure of reducing the carbon footprint, right? So it's two things that they're trying to handle at the same time. Then, of course, like all the challenges that were spoken about, renewable energy procurement does not come very easy. There are limitations, there are limited availability, there is regulatory complexities, there's also high costs that are involved. And over and above this, just the nature of renewable energy, right? The intermittency, it calls for heavy investments in infrastructure and technology so that the grid stability can be taken care of. The energy storage as a technology needs to be looked at. Green hydrogen needs to be looked at. And what corporates can do is they can help in addressing some of these challenges, right? Corporates like Amazon are already, and other signatories are already coming together to drive the need and the demand for renewable energy, and in the process driving capital, green capital, and also creating green jobs for the communities that it can operate in. So just transition is a big piece. Companies can come together to address this. One thing that we've realized is, no single company can do this on their own. While individual companies are taking strides and, are trying to move the needle, there is a need for collaboration. Collaboration is key to transitioning to and decarbonizing. And the reason I say that is because there are multiple stakeholders that are involved in making sure this transition happens. There's governments, there's businesses, there's financial institutions, there's communities and that need to be taken along in this journey. Only then we can get to decarbonization much faster. And what are some of the options that we have, right? we spoke about aggregated PPAs. How can we collate the demand that there is for energy and, so that the corporate demand, the collated demand can actually help you with favorable pricing as you negotiate with the developers. It can actually help address some of the financial and operational risks that there are, right? So knowledge sharing, coming together, can actually not only help these large corporates, you can bring along your supply chain who need to transition if large corporates also need to get to net zero. The second one is offshore wind farms offers huge potential. I don't have to go into details. Angela did a great job about it. The fact that I just want to touch upon quickly is that while there's potential, there's also need for collaboration and knowledge sharing so that you can address some of the complexities related to integration with the grid, the regulatory complexities, the environmental impact assessment of an offshore wind farm, right? So how can we work together to address some of these challenges just so that the adoption is much faster? And a point in case is, Amazon has been, working on the renewable energy bit for our own operations. We've been working with large utility scale companies, project developers, and governments to actually aid our renewable energy transition. And as we speak today, we've done this through long-term PPAs, which range from 10 to 20 years. And what this is helping us do is today we have capacities up to 20 gigawatt across 400 projects worldwide. So that is really helping Amazon, and I think more companies can look at this as an option. Energy storage, again, is an area we spoke about it, the other panelists spoke about it. The challenge with energy storage, or rather, a lot of the challenges of renewable energy is addressed by energy storage, right? The intermittency of renewables, the nature, that it is not available all the time. The supply and demand for energy is a challenge, that the energy storage can address. And so it is important that while we understand energy storage could be important, how do we actually speed up the innovation that is needed? As opposed to all of us working in silos and trying to run pilots and projects in these areas, can we come together, share knowledge, share expertise, and in the long run, it actually helps us bring down the costs of all the R&D projects that we're running, right? So there is merit in coming together. As you can see, there's a lot of opportunity that exists here, but how can we actually drive or foster collaboration? And this is where I wanted to speak about the Climate Pledge itself. The Climate Pledge was founded in 2019 to do just that, to bring companies together, to create an ecosystem where we can have a unified voice. We can speak to the policymakers. We can create the demand signals. We can create the need that there is to switch to renewable energy, right? And right now, you would see that we have signatories. The signatories that are a part of the Climate Pledge are already working on transitioning to renewables. There are many who have taken up 100% RE as a goal, members of RE100 as well. And we are trying to see that we create projects that we can run with these signatories that can actually drive collaboration, right? So I'll give you an example. Amazon has been working with Maersk, Unilever, which are signatories of the pledge, alongside World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Smart Freight Center, as well as McKinsey, and we actually co-developed and launched a guidance that can actually help the logistics companies with their transmission emissions, right? Your transport logistics emissions. And basically what this does is it actually helps bring in the data transparency and data sharing for companies. There are several opportunities that exist in collaboration, and many companies our signatories have been trailblazing the path for a net zero future. Specifically in Asia Pacific, we have companies who signed up, companies like Canva, Ishizaka, Terrascope, NEC, Mahindra Logistics. all trying to get to a net zero future through collaboration. And the point that I want to drive home, or rather end with, is that it is possible for us to get to net zero. It is important. And there is belief that with all the solutions that are available, there is absolute opportunity, and we can get there much faster if we work together and we work in union to drive decarbonization and accelerate decarbonization so that we can all get to net zero by 2040 or in Paris Agreement timelines. So I'm hoping that a lot more organizations join us in this endeavor, and we can actually transition to net zero much sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matsi. And it's really encouraging that you're not only getting companies to commit to ambitious targets, but you're also helping to take action.
That's
and
right.
those collaborations are incredibly important to help, and also extremely difficult. We know from experience that bringing together those companies to actually do something material is incredibly difficult and takes time. So it's great to see those examples. You've reached 400 members. How can companies in the Asia-Pacific region join this movement and get involved in these collaborations?
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question, Sam. Actually, in terms of companies that want to join this collaborative initiative, it is simple. You need to take up a commitment to get to net zero by 2040. And in saying that, you are actually committing to 3 additional pillars, which is measuring and reporting your emissions on an annual basis, then investing on strategies and innovations within your operations so that you could decarbonize your own carbon footprint. And the third thing being, once you've looked at all areas where you can actually try and decarbonize, and there are some emissions that still remain, you look at credible carbon offsets for that small piece at the end to reach net zero ambition. If you'd like to join, you just need to access our website, theclimatepledge.com, and you can actually go ahead and fill in some information. We will just screen the information to see that the fitment is right. And if so, it'll maybe take us like 2 weeks or so that you can actually go ahead and join the Climate Pledge if you meet all of the requirements. In terms of the collaboration piece, I just wanted to highlight that, we constantly work with signatories, the members, and try to understand what are their specific focus areas, right? Are they looking to collaborate on renewable energy? Are they looking to collaborate on transportation or built environment? And what we do is we create forums to have these discussions and identify just the right companies that are interested in these projects, and then try to drive investments in this. It doesn't mean that Amazon is doing all the investment as a signatory or a company A, B, or C are doing. It is a joint effort. Everyone comes together. We're pooling in resources. We're pooling in expertise. We're pooling in manpower that is needed, as well as going as an industry to the policymakers to say, hey, this is a project we're interested. We need the charging infrastructure, for example. How can we work with you to address these policy challenges that we have? As opposed to all of us individually reaching out to these companies, as an industry, when you go and make this case, they're also clear, the OEMs are also clear that there is a demand and we need to work on addressing this and we can make it happen, yeah.
Right. So I'm hearing within that a very clear message that companies are welcome to come and make the pledge. There are criteria, there is reporting, but also there's an emphasis on action. And what you get out of being a member of the pledge group is really dependent on what you're prepared to put in.
Exactly.
So again, important for these groups to be really active, and it's great to hear some of those examples of tangible action happening.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you.
So our speakers have been so good at sticking to time that the contingency that I left in the agenda hasn't been needed. So I now either need to bring on the next speakers slightly early or fill a good 5 minutes of time with me speaking. So I should fill a minute of that just by thanking the speakers. It's been really inspiring. And I think what's really important is to hear the tangible action that companies are taking. As I say, there's one thing companies making a pledge, there's one thing companies joining initiatives, but it's really that tangible action. And action at the scale that we're seeing is really, really important. And the companies driving investment in, driving the people they invest in to make change, the impact of that is significantly bigger than the impact of the company itself making changes. So, real multiplier effects there. 920 megawatt wind farms, that is beyond comprehension in terms of the scale of that facility. It would take probably all day to take a boat around it. It's absolutely huge. Delta Electronics really putting sustainability at the heart of their business and driving the EV industry through early investment. And finally, Amazon's Climate Pledge, bringing all of this kind of activity together to help companies collaborate and really drive forward their sustainability ambitions. So I'd like to thank all the speakers. As I say, next year, I do hope that companies beyond Taiwan will see the leadership example that Taiwan is setting and maybe come to the table with, right, okay, we're going to match that. So I have to say, whenever I do go to Taiwan, I am very impressed by the levels of leadership. And the fact that 24/7 is already being very, very seriously talked about, we need to have a conversation. 24/7 renewable electricity is a huge challenge, but it's certainly the next big thing that we have to do. So I'd like to welcome to the stage our next presentation. We'll be looking at the green hydrogen solution. And I'd like to introduce to the stage our moderator, Caroline Chur, lead analyst for the Asia Pacific Clean Power with Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Caroline will be leading our discussion on green hydrogen, which will play an extremely important role in the energy transition. But is there a risk of it being seen as a silver bullet to solve everybody's problems? And I hope we'll get into that in the discussion.
We'll definitely talk about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Excellent.
you, Sam. And welcome everyone to our next session, the Green Energy Solution, Hydrogen Solution. So as introduced, my name is Caroline Chua, and I lead the APAC Clean Economics analysis for Bloomberg NEF. And we have heard a lot from the wonderful presentations from the 4 female leaders, and it's not often that we see 4 female leaders in an entire session. So congratulations on that, and thank you for your wonderful sharing. That sustainability and decarbonization is on the minds of corporations and governments now around the world. And increasingly, a lot of attention is on hydrogen. So this panel discussion will focus on green hydrogen developments and progress around Southeast Asia. We'll be looking at different standards for green hydrogen applications, what can be done to accelerate the rollout, while also being realistic about which sector is it effective for. And joining me for the discussion would be Sharon Barrow, former General Secretary for the International Trade Union Confederation. Mr. Benedict Chia, Director General for Climate Change from the National Climate Change Secretariat, Prime Minister Office of Singapore. And last but not least, Rahul Kichlu, Practice Manager for the World Bank. So thank you, panelists, for joining us today. And as I mentioned earlier, hydrogen is really gaining a lot of attention and interest around the world as a decarbonization fuel. And it has also picked up momentum here in Southeast Asia. So as an opening question to all of you, there are substantial growth opportunities for green hydrogen development and deployment across the region. How would you rate the current rate of progress across these metrics, and where are the bright spots in the region? And maybe, Rahul, if we could start with you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and colleagues. Good morning to all. Great discussion, great to be here. Really pleased to participate on behalf of the World Bank. Let me start by contextualizing a little bit the way we see the market growth in Asia-Pacific region. It's suffice to say that Asia-Pacific region has been the growth engine of the global economy, and as previous speakers mentioned, this is a very energy-hungry part of the world. And we've also seen that much of the energy demand has been satisfied with fossil fuel based solutions in the past couple of decades. And so the real challenge in front of the policymakers, the previous speaker from Amazon was talking about how do we maintain energy security and reliability, but also honoring the climate commitments. I would say from a policy perspective, the governments are looking at it as a trifecta. It is, of course, energy security, reliability. It is at the same time honoring the climate commitments, but very importantly, doing it in an affordable and inclusive manner. And I think those are aspects that are at the heart of some of the newer solutions that are coming up, green hydrogen being one of them. But at the flip side, it's also a massive opportunity. If you consider many of the other sectors where decarbonization is important, energy remains one of the bright spots where we have the technical solutions, where we have the business models, where this green growth is really possible, which can drive innovation, which can drive new jobs in this region, which can drive investments across the value chains. And so hydrogen really plays a very important role as part of that broader solution set for decarbonizing industries. And particularly what excites me is that its application across various different subsegments of the industry. It has a great potential for hard-to-abate sectors, heavy industries, chemicals, steel, iron manufacturing. It has great potential for building and commercial sector for heat and power generation, on-site power generation. Transportation sector, which again is lagging in terms of the viable solutions that can drive shipping, aviation, cargo, and trucking type industries. And finally, of course, power generation itself, where, again, quoting the previous speakers, it can be a solution not only to overcome the intermittency of the renewable system, but also act as energy storage and energy transportation system together with that. So I think we see great potential for growth for hydrogen in this region. Already, if you look at just India and China, that's 40% of global consumption in hydrogen. We see the industry growing in the next decades, 4x to 5x. And by 2050, this can account for about 10 to 20% of final energy use for the Asia-Pacific region. So at the very beginning, nascent stage of the industry, but excited to be part of a supportive ecosystem.
Thank you, Rahul. And Sharon?
Well, I would say tick, tick, tick to that, because it is not the magic bullet for everything, but it has a potential silver bullet for those sectors that you've already heard about. But let's think about what they are, because they are hard to abate sectors. They are indeed transportation, particularly long haul, aviation, because of the capacity, not just for power itself, but also storage, and of course when mixed for potentially aviation fuels with CO2 that's either come from carbon capture or indeed from the air, then you have a capacity for much lower carbon emissions in transport than you did before. In the area of heavy industry, you know, steel, aluminium, cement, we see already the use of green hydrogen is creating cleaner steel. I worked with the unions and SSAB Steel in Sweden, and of course you already heard that in some areas like construction, critical minerals, in terms of what in my own country Fortescue is doing with iron ore mining. These areas are areas that we need to clean up in terms of decarbonisation, and it is a critical component. So 10 to 20% by 2050, yes. But I do want to also stress that, and for us, my former role was as head of the global labour movement. That's about jobs, jobs and jobs. We'll talk about jobs later, but it's about indeed a just transition, protecting jobs in key industries, but also adding jobs because of the infrastructure investment that is required. But I wanted to also give you a sense that there are other experiments. I mean, people see the use of green hydrogen in that context. Also, of course, countries like Germany are interested in importing green hydrogen in the form of ammonia because it actually will reduce their dependency on gas. But in India, for example, you see some terrific experiments with livelihood, added value on the energy security front in low cost but much smaller deployment of electrolysers in communities that haven't previously been served, not just for direct electricity, but in order to promote manufacturing opportunities or other areas of the economy. So it has great potential. I will talk a little bit later about some of the challenges to reduce the costs, but there's no doubt that this is a good news story for decarbonisation, for jobs, and for potentially protecting and enhancing communities that are otherwise at risk of being stranded.
Thank you. And Benedict?
So I'd say that if you look at where hydrogen was, let's say like 20 years ago, people were already talking about a hydrogen economy. And at that point in time, initially there was some hype, but the hype never materialized. And I was told even if you trace further back beyond 20 years, this was a topic that was already on the table. But our sense is that this time around is different. And it's different for two reasons. One reason is that if you look very closely at what's the source of green hydrogen, it's renewables. And renewables costs have fallen drastically. It has reached a point whereby in many countries and increasingly more countries, renewables is cost competitive against fossil fuel alternatives. The other thing that has changed is the cost of electrolyzers. I think if you track over the last 5 years, electrolyzers costs have fallen much faster than what many people have predicted. So this time around, hydrogen is really becoming increasingly competitive. And as countries embrace and realize the need to address climate change, they're putting a price on carbon, by it implicitly or explicitly. I think it narrows the cost gap. When we first started looking at this a bit more seriously about 3-4 years ago, people were telling us that, oh, cost priority probably 2040 to 2050. And over the years, the 2040 to 2050 has shifted to 2040. Now people are talking about 2030 in certain applications. So we think this time around it's a lot more promise, and it feels as if this is more likely than not to actually happen itself. The other significance of the green hydrogen shift and movement, I think as you mentioned, is helping to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. Oil and gas, steel manufacturing, hydrogen has a critical role to play. But more importantly, if you look at how the world is shaping up and shifting and making this transition itself, I think the other very important role that hydrogen has to play is to be able to capture access renewable potential in countries that have more than what they need and export it around the world. In fact, when we first started speaking to Australia on hydrogen, one of the things they told us is that green hydrogen is like exporting love and sunshine, because Australia has got an abundance of sunshine translated to solar energy, solar power. So this is their way of exporting sunshine itself. And I think that's important, because then that means that it unlocks another abatement lever that would help the world be able to decarbonize much faster than if it had not been present. In terms of where we see it going, we see three main segments in which we need to address in order to ensure that the hydrogen value chain moves from nascent to actually something more concrete and to scale up eventually. One is the upstream part itself. So this is the production of hydrogen. And I think we're heartened over the years to see that there are more facilities coming online to produce green and low carbon hydrogen. The other aspect which we think has not gotten and garnered as much attention is the logistics of transporting, distribution, storage, and shipping hydrogen. And this is significant because if you compare the production cost of hydrogen vis-a-vis the landed cost of hydrogen, it can more or less double the cost. And if we don't address it, it could be a significant barrier to greater adoption of green hydrogen globally. And then the last part of it is the end use applications in the various sectors itself. Some of it requires new infrastructure, replacement of current fuels, and that's a shift that actually will need to be made. So I do agree with the points that's being made. It's a nascent at this point in time, but there's a lot of promise, and I think if we work on all the various key issues in different parts of the value chain, hopefully we can see the promise being realized sooner rather than later.
Thank you. And I think, as you mentioned, we're now seeing several factors come together to help the economics of hydrogen, to help the potential of it. And Benedict, if I can stick with you. So Singapore announced its net zero target, which is to achieve net zero by 2050. So how do you see the role of hydrogen for Singapore's net zero pathway?
Yeah. So early last year, we announced net zero by 2050 goal for Singapore. It's a significant shift because, and early last year was 2022. In early 2020, we announced the first iteration of our long-term low emissions development strategy. And under the LEDS, our goal was actually to halve peak emissions by 2050, so 33 megatons, and then to get to net zero as soon as viable in the second half of the century. And we weren't able to define which year itself, except to say that we're just trying to do it as soon as possible. And in a space of 2 years, we shifted our goal from 33 MT to 0. One of the reasons which my minister has explained in Parliament why we made the shift is technology. Hydrogen as an example of a technology shift. I think if you track over the last 2 years, the number of deals being signed on hydrogen, the number of facilities coming online, the number of investments that countries and companies are making in this space, it has increased exponentially. And I think that has given us assurance that this is something that is more likely than not to take off, and it will be an important lever in terms of helping us reduce our emissions. And on that front, we see hydrogen primarily being deployed in a couple of sectors. Within our domestic economy, or rather our domestic inventories, power is one area where hydrogen could potentially be deployed. Number of GENCOs, or rather power turbine manufacturers have indicated that current gas turbines can already take in a certain small percentage blend of hydrogen. And around 2030, they anticipate producing turbines that can accept 100% hydrogen. And Singapore, if you are familiar, our power mix, more than 95% of our power is generated from natural gas. So that allows us to easily blend hydrogen at very low volumes for a start before eventually transiting to higher volumes. We did announce last year that we think by 2030, we could have up to 50% of our electricity being generated from hydrogen. So hydrogen, important part to play for power, particularly given the context of our how we generate power mainly from natural gas. The other major sector in Singapore where we think hydrogen could play a significant role is industry, and on two fronts. Hydrogen as a feedstock to produce industrial specialty chemicals, petrochemicals and whatnot. And actually, if you look at Singapore right now, that's the main source of hydrogen usage. Our industrial sectors already use hydrogen. The thing is that they are not using green hydrogen. They're using hydrogen derived from fossil fuel. So that's a sector that's already familiar with using it. The other area in which industry can use hydrogen in Singapore is for heating. And that's the element that is, in a sense, we call it hard to abate. Because industrial uses of like heating and whatnot actually takes place at a very high temperatures. And that makes it difficult and challenging to electrify. And hydrogen presents a way for us to be able to replace some of these fossil fuel alternatives with lower carbon use. And domestically, if you look at power and industry, they already take up more than 80% of our overall emissions. So hydrogen can play a significant role in the shift. On the international emissions, because apart from our domestic emissions, Singapore, we also have international emissions. We are a major maritime and aviation hub. And maritime has been talking a lot about hydrogen and its carriers, such as ammonia, for example, or some of the synthetic fuels, which use hydrogen itself as a feedstock input. And we do think that there's a significant role in which we can help deploy hydrogen in the maritime sector. In fact, we have signed a number of green corridor agreements between ports, Singapore, Rotterdam, Long Beach, Los Angeles, and we are in discussions to sign more green corridors. And these green corridors will see the deployment of low carbon fuels, which would include hydrogen itself. Aviation is also a sector that we are looking at quite closely. I think, as you mentioned, sustainable aviation fuel also does use hydrogen as an input. So overall, it's critical, it's important in terms of helping us reach our net zero goals and aspirations.
Thank you. And I think it's exciting to see that you're not only focusing on hydrogen for the domestic use, but that the demand locally here in Singapore, which doesn't have the space or the renewables to produce its own green hydrogen, can actually fuel developments in the neighboring countries or countries with export ambition for hydrogen. And I think there's a lot of consensus, right, on where hydrogen can be used to decarbonize, like the hard-to-abate sectors, industrial processes, maybe agriculture, aviation, transport. And Sharon, if I can turn to you, there are many potential upsides. But which sectors do we need to be a bit more realistic about the potential of hydrogen as a decarbonization fuel?
Well, on the cautious side, the estimates show that about 50% of electricity can be directly connected to renewables. So you don't need the hydrogen boost, if you like, the catalyzer. But if you want to actually look at the whole of economy and the supply chains that are required, even for construction, absent the question of heat and air conditioning and so on. But if you back up and look at the extensive use of steel, if we don't actually use it for mining iron ore in some difficult environments, plus looking at the high intensity heat for steel, but the same for other building and construction materials, then we won't actually abate those sectors. So that's critical. For working people, that's also about jobs and just transition and protecting communities. The biggest downside, whether it's aviation, long-haul transport, maritime, all of the ambitions that we have, including heavy industry, is indeed to make sure that the cost comes down and that just as we've seen the decreasing costs in renewables generally, that's going to help exactly. But we also need to look at what else we can do. And in the US, they're using concessional credits under the IRA Act. In Europe, they're looking at percentage demands that actually provide certainty for those who are investing in green hydrogen. What we've got to avoid is the war between green and grey and blue and, other areas of hydrogen, because the real question that is at the core of that, is it decarbonising? And if you don't have limits on carbon emissions, then in fact that's a huge question in terms of those who would simply promote fossil fuel generated hydrogens. But the other question is the cost. And if we bring down the cost of green hydrogen, which is possible with demand, and if major areas of the world, i.e. the US, Europe, parts of Asia, who have the capacity to do that, bring down that cost, then the projections are about you can decrease it by about 60% by 2050. That will actually mean that, in fact, it's much cheaper than other forms of hydrogen. So then the question of infrastructure becomes one of, again, good news for jobs, but how do you repurpose in a transitionary mode the pipes, the infrastructure, and so on. So I get a bit, I mean, I sit on the board of the Green Hydrogen Association because I'm passionate about getting those sectors where there are lots and lots of jobs up and running for sustainability. But I'm not an expert. But what I do know is if we're serious about a future for the planet and our children and grandchildren, then we should be choosing where we can to actually invest in the best possible decarbonisation technologies. So it's a good news story, as we said, for 10 to 20%, but it may grow for other, if there are small scale uses, but in a sense that's not the point. The point is if we don't use it for those hard to abate sectors, then we will not make the net zero commitments by 2050 or 2070 or 2000, and of course we know the climate consequences.
Great, thank you. And Rahul, if I can come to you, what are some of the impediments and challenges that we see, to scale up hydrogen? And also, are there early lessons that we can already draw upon to help push and accelerate the development of hydrogen in the region?
Thank you, Caroline. Great question. I'm going to pick up on where Sharon left off on the cost issues that Mr. Chia mentioned as well. Look, I think we need to mainstream the commercialization aspects of this industry, and that's economics 101. You have huge demand coming in, production has to match, and for professional government policy planners, this needs to be not just a low carbon, but least cost low carbon solutions, because all of the sector master plan investment strategies are all driven through an unbiased selection of where the right solutions take place. I think there's tremendous potential, but at the same time, growth in green hydrogen is possible within the region in terms of production as well. Right now, it is a very fractional industry. It's less than 2% of the overall hydrogen production. And so solutions that we have seen in the regions around Australia's solar capabilities, Taiwan's offshore wind capability, other excess renewable availability within the region that's coming online has to be potentially looked at as part of the hydrogen solutions as well. But fundamentally, this is about high capex needs, right? So something that we talk about quite a bit is the 1, 10, 20, 30 framework, and stay with me here. For every million ton of annual green hydrogen production, you need about 10 gigawatts of electrolyzers, you need about 20 gigawatts of renewable, you need about $30 billion of investments, right? So that is a very complex beast to tackle and requires everybody across the value chain to participate in it. These investment needs are not just in the production side, as Mr. Chia was mentioning. You have to equally look at transportation, storage, safety of those supplies that are coming online, as well as all of the retrofitting that is needed, not just in the greenfield investments of end use, but also brownfield retrofitting of the industry itself. So again, stepping back from a government standpoint, I would say 3 big challenges to tackle. First is policy and planning to make sure that longer term visions are articulated, there is predictability for the industry, it is hardwired in not just the ambition and vision statements, but investment planning and permitting that flows from that overall ecosystem. Regulatory and legal transparency is absolutely key, and this is not just about how you legislate within your own jurisdiction, but how it flows as common set of frameworks and standards across this industry, particularly from a regional trade standpoint. Financial structures that make sense, looking at viability gap, how those can be overcome, and not leaving a chicken and an egg problem that you have investment in production first or demand pull first. But I think another impediment or rather challenge for us to think through is all these associated factors with the hydrogen industry. Availability of water, land use and permitting, minerals and materials that are required to promote this new industry, whether it's on renewables, but also particularly on hydrogen. And really this whole aspect of community engagement, because this will require a longer term commitment across the economy shifting towards greener solutions, and beyond industry, power, transportation, all of the other sectors that have impacts on it have to be looked through centrally and planned and executed centrally. So I'll come back to some of those points in the follow-up.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to ask if you could elaborate on some of the specific private sector and maybe public sector policy reforms that are needed to address some of these challenges.
So I think, let me pick an example where we are recently involved with this, is India, where there is a clear endpoint, 2070 net zero, looking across the economy, what are the decarbonization solutions and how each one of them can be incentivized through proper planning and policy reform. And we are working with a massive multi-year $3 billion budget support operation incentivizing specific reforms of the planning infrastructure, of the safety and regulatory standards, of the policies that need to go in for procurement and contracting, right? So these are some examples, but I think where the public sector, and particularly the DFIs and MDBs, can play an important role is providing that advisory services to the government in what are some of the hurdles, the analytics, the policy reforms that need to be put in place. Technical assistance that is required for policymakers, decision makers, in addition to the private sector that is coming up with a solution to set up the right frameworks for investment. And again, here convening is very important because, as I was mentioning, that if Singapore sets up something that is at odds with Malaysia, with other ASEAN countries, that requires a multi-jurisdictional approach, and it's quite important to make sure that is done collectively. Then I think on the investment structuring aspects, right? So as with any nascent industry, financial structures are still evolving, right? So blended finance solution is going to be critical, and there again, the public-private partnership plays a very important role. Where are subsidies going to be directed? And subsidies may not be direct financial subsidies, it may be policy targets, it may be guarantees for offtake, it may be concessional financing that is made available as PPP structures, but also very importantly, carbon pricing, right? So how do you design carbon markets that take on board the green hydrogen solutions? I think one example I would also suggest is something that we launched at the World Bank called the Hydrogen for Development Partnership. This has right now just launched about 6 months ago, 30 members, including governments, private sector, producers, consumers, and solution providers across the value chain. So these are the types of elements, again, looking at a whole value chain-wide solution, what role the private sector plays, what role the public sector plays, and how us as sort of supporters on both sides of the coin can provide those platforms to accelerate impact.
Thank you. And you mentioned carbon pricing, and that's something that Singapore has done, right? They have put out an ambition to increase their carbon pricing, and that could really help the economics of these alternative technologies coming up. But picking up on some of the points you mentioned about the type of policy reforms that we need to address up the financing gap, the investment needs, but also what you mentioned earlier, Benedict, on the logistical challenges like your production, your storage, your transport, your distribution that can often double the landed cost of hydrogen. How is policy being developed in Singapore to address some of these challenges?
So there are maybe two very broad challenges that we have been talking about. One is in a sense, the financing challenges, and one is the logistic challenges. Maybe I'll tackle the financing first. So financing, I agree with what Rahul actually said, that carbon pricing is important. You need to put a meaningful price on carbon. And that was one of the reasons why we decided, as we shifted our ambition, to also increase our carbon tax rates. And not only to increase it, but to provide a very clear trajectory of where it's going, because these are all long-term investments, and when investors make long-term investments, they need to have policy certainty as to where the future trajectory is. So currently, right now, our carbon tax rate is $5 in Singapore. We have stated that by the end of this decade, it would go up to $50 to $80. We have also indicated upward shifts of 25 and 45 within the next 4 or 5 years, and all of these have been announced, and all the 25 and 45 has also been passed in Parliament and legislated as well. So that provides a policy certainty as to where exactly we are going. So that's an important piece of it. The other important piece of it is apart from the price signal, what do you do with the carbon tax revenue? And we have stated in Singapore that we would be using the carbon tax revenue to fund emissions reduction activities. We have already enhanced a lot of our current schemes, and we do provide significant support. For some of these solutions that are upcoming, like green hydrogen, we are in the process of discussing with key stakeholders what sort of financial incentives is actually required. But the fact that your carbon price levels are going up already provides the ammunition, the resources for you to be able to support some of these things. So that's one piece that's quite important. The other piece that's quite important, it's really more related to the financing and the trading of hydrogen, of carbon itself. And one of the key pieces that's needed, because if you look at what's required to drive the shift towards hydrogen, a lot of it is, there will be a lot of heavy upfront capital costs, the infrastructure costs, which if you see what's being done in other countries can run easily into the billions of dollars. So you need certainty for the long-term financing, and that's what we're working quite closely with our financial authorities to ensure that some of these green and what we call blended financing solutions are available. The financiers are aware that this is a very different product class. They understand some of the underlying risks involved. The policy certainty is quite critical, and that's where setting a clear goal is critical for us, because if the country doesn't have a clear emissions reduction targets, then you really don't know where all this is going to sit under. But given that we have stated very clearly that we want to be net zero by 2050, we have released our national hydrogen strategy last year and made it very clear that this is a very important pillar for us to get to net zero. That provides the overall policy certainty that we are serious about this. We will continue ensuring that our landscape, our tools, our initiatives are going to be conducive to the development. And that actually helps facilitate some of the financiers to be willing to support and to finance some of these very large infrastructure projects itself. The other piece is the logistics. And actually, if you want to reduce the transportation costs, the logistic costs, the storage costs, what is critical and what is important is for there to be more cross-border volume and trade, because it's with this volume and trade that actually result in more economies of scale and scope that would then help reduce the cost itself. And one of the important pieces of work that we are working with a number of our partner countries, including Australia, is what we call a guarantee of origin scheme, which tries to establish very clear standards in terms of what we mean by low carbon hydrogen. And I agree with the point that you made earlier that actually you should not think about it in terms of color. We disagree with the color type approach. We want to go for an emissions-based approach. Doesn't matter whether you're green, blue, pink, gray, or what. As long as you meet a certain emissions threshold, you should be considered as low carbon hydrogen. And these standards should ideally be interoperable across different countries, because you don't want different countries to adopt different standards. Maybe one country is a color-based code, one country sets the bar for low carbon at a different level from another country, and that, I think, impedes cross-border trade itself. So with greater facilitation of cross-border trading of hydrogen, I think it plays an important part. The other critical piece to facilitate that, I think, which Rahul alluded to, is the safety standards. Because some of the carriers of hydrogen, like ammonia, are toxic in nature. And if you're thinking about deploying hydrogen in a non-industrial type setting, actually you need to get the safety standards right. So that's quite important. The last piece that we are doing to address some of the logistics and the cost challenges is R&D. It's still nascent. There's still certain technologies that are at a lower technology readiness level, which we think can be scaled up. So we have, in Singapore, we have got this low carbon energy research fund. Phase 1, we put aside 55 million Singapore dollars. We are embarking on phase 2, which more than doubles it up. to close to 130 million itself. And an important aspect of this, our low carbon research, is going to be on hydrogen. And the whole idea is really to address the issues that we have been talking about. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. And I mean, the R&D part is really interesting, and I agree with the point that this needs to be a regional or even a global cooperation, because we are looking at cross-border trades. We need the framework to be put in place now so that, you know, they can be developed holistically instead of later scrambling on how to harmonize all of that together. But one piece you mentioned, Sharon, earlier, it's about jobs creation, right? And also one part of the Singapore hydrogen strategy is on to support workforce training and development of the broader hydrogen economy. So which areas of the green hydrogen value chain have the highest potential for jobs creation?
Absolutely, I'll answer that, but I want to just reinforce it for jobs as well as for you know, a long-term vision and the development that Rao mentioned, not just in wealthy countries, but indeed across all countries, particularly those without the capacity for finance, and indeed for the logistics integration. You need partnerships, because you do need those interjurisdictional questions to be part and parcel of you know, the demand and supply curve. Then you'll get the jobs. What I was struck by earlier, if you think about the green maritime corridors, then what you're already doing is setting up port-to-port logistical infrastructure, but also the certainty for those that are going to invest in those, in the shipping, the employment, the transition, and the port infrastructure. And that in itself gives a confidence that that will continue to generate. I do want to say that in the jobs question, there's no clear Asia picture. I went to look at it, but because the impact here, or the footprint, is still so small, and we need those partnerships, those commitments to actually get the research capacity. What I'm going to do is give you an example from Africa, and I chose Africa rather than Europe or America because that's too easy in a sense. In Africa, there are 6 countries that have a green hydrogen alliance. They are in fact Egypt, Kenya, Mauritania, Morocco, Namibia and South Africa. And the projections there in just those countries are 4 million new jobs, plus the protection of tens of millions of existing jobs and communities. So if in just those 6 countries you can get 4 million jobs by 2050, then we do need the skilling and reskilling, but we also need to be very ambitious about the question. But I'm going to end on and you asked me where. Well, the jobs are, first of all, the jobs protected in current communities and industries, because the industries of today are largely the industries of tomorrow. The jobs will shift, the technology will shift, but you are still going to have mining, construction, transport, you know, energy as the foundation and so on. And so they're in the infrastructure end of it, absolutely, lots of jobs in the establishment of renewable energy and the electrolyser end of the infrastructure mode. There are jobs in the logistics, in incredible amounts of jobs potentially in logistics, but there are also jobs in services. And people often don't look at the services equation. And so, you know, all of these things give you great hope. But what I wanted to say is, I don't think we should be blind. There is a technology war going on, but in the end, and I totally agree with Benedict, for the minute, we have to demand that there's a standard that is low carbon emissions. When you look at, you know, fossil fuel-based emissions, then they are in fact way too high in terms of emission standard. People are claiming it's clean, when in fact, you know, you can show that it's not any better than direct gas, etc. But if we're serious about it, then think about what it means. The difference is between oil and water. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to have water conservation, water, a capacity for renewable energy and desalination, potentially on sites, a whole range of water solutions, and that's serious, just as the land permits, etc., are indeed a component. But oil versus water in a future where we have to shift the basis of our economy, frankly, we have to be conscious of that. It will be a transition, but we have to make sure that that transition is viable so that we're not pitting technological infrastructure against each other, and that in turn we can retrofit some of the pipes or the other forms of mobility and transport. But the other thing is in-place development. Because a lot of this will, you know, and this is uncomfortable for some of us to think about, but because it will draw, you know, much more concentrated activity, whether it's ports, whether it's steel-making facilities, whether it's, you know, around iron ore production in steel, or whether it's other areas of production, concentrating in place will protect and grow communities. And that's more jobs on top of that.
Thank you. I think we all agree that...
And that's just transition, by the way. And that's, of course, my big focus is, can we transition without stranded people or stranded assets? This is a good, just transition story, if we get it right.
Indeed, indeed. I think the just transition part, it's very important, but also, you know, that could lead us into a whole different discussion that perhaps we could have another day. So with the remaining last few minutes, I think we all agree that hydrogen is required for, you know, the global net zero targets. We need it to decarbonize the hard-to-abate industries, but there's still a lot of work that also needs to be done, a lot of frameworks to be implemented. So if we look at the future in maybe 3 different timeframes, the short, medium, and long term, and I'd like to open this question to all our panelists, what needs to be achieved to allow green hydrogen to achieve its massive potential as a driver of green growth over the next 3 decades? Maybe Rahul?
Thank you, colleagues. Great discussion. Let me certainly echo that cautious optimism. It's not euphoria. There is a lot of real solutions that are coming online. I think there's a lot of natural advantages that green hydrogen has over some of the other solutions. This whole idea of incremental solutions that, you know, you can blend molecules in existing value chains to start off with, in addition to looking at full replacement of electrification, for example, right? So I think we certainly remain, you know, quite excited about that there is ample room for creativity and innovation, but it needs to be, you know, handled in a systematic and stepwise manner, focusing on coordinated action across a certain subset of industries, looking at manufacturing, production of hydrogen together with vertical industry solutions to start off with, whether it's in heavy industries or in particular transportation sectors or power sector, and then building out from there. So I think in the short term, there would be certain vertical industry solutions that are mainstream globally, and over time, broadening it into further set of solutions that are more economy-wide, making sure that these partnerships, collaborations, convening, and community-based solutions are at the heart of it.
Thank you. Benedict?
So maybe I'll just take a very quick shot at each of your timeframes. So I think in the short time frame, I think what we really need is to see pilots and demonstration projects to actually show and to provide confidence that this can be done in a safe way. You need the regulatory frameworks on safety, guarantee of origins actually to be put in place as well, to provide the assurance that whatever is being done is safe, has a low carbon footprint. So to me, that's the key priority in the short term. In the medium term, I think what's required is in a sense, the midstream to actually come in place. So this is really the logistics, the distribution, the storage, the receiving terminals, the export terminals, which will need to scale up quite significantly. And even though here I say medium term, actually, if we want to get to the medium term, we need to start work now, because the infrastructure deployment for the medium term is not something that can be done overnight. We need to start setting aside land And in many cities, including Singapore, you need waterfront land. And waterfront land tends to be quite scarce for some of these purposes itself. In the longer term, as you deploy at a much larger scale, I think the issue which Sharon mentioned, which is the just transition type issues, will actually start to come in, because there will be sectors that would be, or rather workers, certain activities that would be displaced, that would be replaced by hydrogen. And how do you ensure that some of these activities that are being replaced, the workers especially, equip themselves with the right skill set so as to be able to take on new roles in this new future green hydrogen revolution? So those to me are the three very, very big chunks that actually we need to address. Thanks.
And I would say you can wrap all of those up in partnerships. If I had to pick one thing, it's partnerships, because you need partnerships across jurisdictions with governments who are willing right now to do the hard work with experts on the regulatory framework, and that Benedict so ably outlined, as does Raoul, and you need to make sure that's done now, because that will set the standards base so we don't get into the same war we've got on carbon markets and other areas about what are the standards that provide validity or legitimacy and are not about substitution. And so that's the first thing. But other partnerships you need are the financial partnerships. You can't simply look at the trillions of dollars ultimately that's going to be invested in this area and not shift the way we do business on finance. There are the developing country issues and finance and de-risking and, currency discrimination and all of those elements in other sectors that come into play here. But there's also, again, about those partnerships. If you've got the sort of contracts where you've got Germany actually already committing to green ammonia from the production in Kenya through the Fortescue Group, then you've got some certainty for those governments in a win-win-win environment, as well as the producers. So finance, regulation, and then the actual, and I will come back to it just very briefly, the partnerships around the just transition dialogue, because you have to start now talking to the workers, talking to their communities, so they know what the hope is for the future. So they trust it, they're willing to actually engage in the skills provision that's vital, but planning requires partnerships across all of the areas of finance, logistics and regulation.
Thank you. And if I can just conclude, and maybe to echo Sharon, I think what we really need is more partnerships, more conversations, and action right now, because this is something that everybody is looking towards too, but there's still a lot of work that needs to get there. But we also don't have a very long leadway or runway to get there. So hopefully we'll see a lot more conversations happening, a lot more partnerships happening, a lot more pilots happening. And I'd like to thank all the esteemed panelists for joining us today, and thank you for your sharing as well. And back to you, Sen.
Thank you very much
Thank
to
you.
Caroline
That's
and to the panel for a really lively
Thank you very much.
and
Yes.
informative discussion. So we now have a break where you can go and grab a coffee and a bit of food, and most importantly, meet each other and make those connections to really shift the energy transition forward. So we're going to be starting again at 11:30 with a session on innovation, followed by a focus on India, India's leadership of the G20. So an exciting second half of this morning, starting again at 11:30.